In this video, I want to explore flow, I want to explore consciousness, and the imperative of freedom of movement within the psyche. And we'll do it in a couple of different ways. First, the arenas. So we have a wheel of emotion, just like the color wheel, and just like the weather, just like any thermometer in an environment. A healthy thermometer has the full range of response, and as it's moved through different terrain, it's going to rise and fall to its highest extreme, to its lowest point. And our feelings, as well as our thoughts, our beliefs, our curiosity, need to have this freedom of movement. We've got to be able to explore and examine every thought, every feeling, every belief, every physical sensation. And when we do, we have what's called freedom of movement. And if you look at the bicycle wheel here and understand basic mechanics, in order for this bicycle wheel to turn, every spoke in the wheel has got to touch the ground. Now, in this metaphor, the ground is consciousness, in this case, egoic consciousness, because our human ego is conscious of things as it emerges in language. So what happens is we're moving around, and there's a sensation, there's something that kind of vaguely catches our attention, and as we bring it into focus, we bring it into language. And we say, I've got a strange feeling in my belly. And that could be as conscious as it becomes, or it could be, I've got a clamping feeling in my belly. Or then it could migrate into looking through the emotional or the feeling thermometer and saying, I've got anger and fear in my belly. And then it can grow into the intensity, intensity thermometer of feelings and say, I've got fear 6 out of 10, I've got anger 2 out of 10. And it can go into the mental, all right, I'm angry at this 2 out of 10. I'm angry at that 4 out of 10. I'm feeling sad about this, 8 out of 10. And it comes into language, and as it comes into language, it comes through consciousness. And it comes through the consciousness of the human ego. And so if we look at this little contact point in the wheel, as we're moving forward in our bicycle, in our life, we have, at any given point, a very tiny part of the wheel, and certainly a very tiny part of us and the whole bicycle, is touching the ground. It's just a couple of inches on this tire and a couple of inches in the tire behind is touching the ground. So that's the bit that's conscious. Now, the challenge with this dynamic is the intersection of ego consciousness and cult or culture. Because within cult or culture, we have secrets, we have taboos, we have trauma, we have beliefs, we have ideas, we have these boundaries, these walls about what is and is not okay. And as individual egos existing in an ecology, as a social mammalian species, in an ecology of other acculturated egos, our human needs, survival, security, love and belonging, self-esteem, just to name the first 4, our human needs are interconnected with the needs of other human beings, with the needs of our cult. And as cults define arbitrarily or otherwise that sexual abuse can't be talked about, that sexual attraction can't be talked about, that these two types of people shouldn't have these types of interactions together, that that's inappropriate, that as the cult decides what is and is not okay, what it is deciding or erecting is a line that says on this side of the line, you will get your survival, your security, your love and belonging, and your self-esteem and cultural validation. But over here on this side of the line, you will not. Not only that, if you cross certain lines, we will punish you. We will hunt you down, and we will destroy your ability to survive. We will kill you in an electric chair. We will inject you with a lethal poison. We will shoot at you if you're running away from a police officer based on skin color or whatever. We will not support your ability to survive, to feel secure in that survival, to have a sense of love and belonging, to have a sense of self-esteem. You will be judged and punished and blah, blah, blah. And this is a big thing for an individual ego to digest. Because the facial expressions, the news stories, the larger field communicates constantly back and forth between an individual ego and the collective ego, which is the cult, which is the culture. What is and is not okay on the path to survival, security, love and belonging, and self-esteem. And as a result, because the cult does not decide as a general rule, cults are very ignorant, are very irrational, very unscientific. For example, you'd never have a watercolor specialist saying, let's see, I'm going to mix yellow here, I'm going to mix blue here, and I'm going to combine them. And what do you get? You get green. So you mix yellow, mix blue in watercolor paints, and you get green. And you're never going to have a scientist blame yellow or blue for that. You mix yellow and you mix blue and you get green. It's pretty obvious. You might have a scientist question the intelligence of the painter if every single time they mix yellow and blue, they get green. But they mix yellow and blue and they're shocked that green showed up. It's like, oh my gosh, why does this green keep showing up? I want yellow and blue, and it's like, well, that's not how it works. And so you might get a little bit of shock from a scientist, that's questioning the intelligence of someone mixing yellow and blue and not wanting green. Because in the whole history of watercolor painting, yellow and blue have never ended up as anything other than but some shade of green. And so that's fine. But in cultural terms, if, for example, you have a drunken, enraged, entitled, narcissistic father, and you have young girls in the house, there is a statistical probability. It's not, because we have much less science and human beings are so complex, we're not looking at just one variable. But the probability field of those two mixing together and ending up in incest or sexual abuse goes up hundreds upon hundreds of % over keeping those two separate. And so you we have this phenomena in our cult where when people with different qualities that our cult produces, meaning if our cult didn't produce addictive personalities, then there wouldn't be any alcoholics. Meaning there are cults around the world, cultures, that are hundreds of times less addictive than other cultures. There are environments in which it's much easier for an addict to break an addiction. And there are environments in which it's very hard. There's so much stress, pain, emotional suppression, and denial that anything is going on, plus punishment if you bring up that there is something going on, that the rate of increased new addiction, people forming some kind of compulsive behavior to get through the day, goes up exponentially. And yet, if we produce environments that produce certain types of human beings, and then we produce environments that bring certain types of unhealthy human beings together in an unhealthy environment with other types of human beings, we're going to create pain. We're going to create shame. We're going to create overwhelm and violation and violence, etc. And yet, in our cult, one of the things we do is we keep that secret. Okay, that happens, but we're not allowed to talk about it. It's okay as long as every person involved participates in the secret. It's taboo. Or it's fine if we talk about it over here, but we can't talk about the president or this or this or this or this or this or this. These things are taboo. And when we get the message that to be seen in a domain that is created, because from a scientific point of view, if you have a phenomena, it is intimately connected with a whole host of other phenomena. And so all you need to do if you want to not have a phenomena is change some of the variables. For example, if you have a petri dish that is growing a virus, and you say that's a deadly, horrible virus that's going to kill lots of people, okay? If you have a petri dish that's growing a virus, all you have to do is change the culture in the petri dish, and the virus disappears. If it's an alkaline virus, you pour a little white vinegar in there and it disappears. If it's a virus that grows really well in an acidic environment, all you do is add some lime and it disappears. Or if it's a virus that requires this, and this, you take one of those things out and it doesn't grow. Or you dump it out into the air, and if the virus can't survive in the air, it disappears. It dies. And so from a scientific point of view, you have to look at patterns of energy in context in their environment. You've got to look at, for example, something like pedophilia in context with a culture that hosts and facilitates the spread of pedophilia. There has to be a series of things there and a series of things not there for that virus to spread. Or the virus of envy and bitterness, another emotional virus, an emotional pattern. Viruses are just self-replicating patterns. And what you have is that when you have an environment that is conducive to a particular pattern, you put the pattern and the environment together. So you have environment, pattern. They kind of fit, don't they? You got a nice long line here. You've got a nice long shape here. And so in this environment, this will turn into 2 of these, and then 3 of these. And then these 3 will go forward and create a new environment, and they'll go forward. And so memes, viruses, patterns of energy, mental energy, emotional energy, physical energy, sexual energy, financial energy, when you combine a pattern with an environment that facilitates the development and replication of the pattern, be it an emotional pattern, a physical pattern, any type of pattern, the pattern will grow. It will spread virally. That's how viruses work. And so if you talk with a scientist, you're never going to get a scientist to put, let's say, an Ebola virus inside a culture that rapidly produces more of Ebola virus, telling the Ebola virus to just calm down. Meaning, you have a petri dish right here that is optimal for Ebola. Okay? It's got all of the nutrients that Ebola needs to spread. It's got the right temperature. Everything is right for the Ebola virus. It's right here. And then we have some Ebola virus. So we're going to inject the Ebola virus into the perfect environment for Ebola virus to spread. And you're never going to have a scientist prepare the Ebola petri dish, inject the Ebola virus, and then talk to the Ebola virus. Hello in there. Don't grow. Don't spread and get much bigger. Use willpower. Use, just don't do it. Don't do it. Think of the higher road. Be a blah, blah, blah. You're never going to have a scientist put a pattern into an environment that has been proven time and time again to exponentially grow and replicate the pattern, and try and cajole a virus not to grow in that pattern, because that is patently absurd. That is insane. But we do this with human beings. Now, you can take another example. You can put a rose in dark shade, and you can try and cajole it to grow, and it won't. It won't do it. You can put a rose in dark shade and try and cajole it into growth. It will not grow. It will die in the shade. And it'll die if you promise it a Rolls Royce. Rose, come on. We'll give you 2 Rolls Royces. You name it. It doesn't work that way. But strangely, when it comes to human beings, we create environments. And it's fascinating because with all of our science, one of the things that we study the least is culture. Now, we say we study here, they eat grasshoppers, over here they give little boats. But what we don't do is correlate. We don't correlate, for example, the amount of smiles in a Vietnamese fishing village versus the amount of smiles in the United States in a fishing community. We don't correlate the daily diet with the type of body type. We don't correlate the cultural beliefs with the type of demeanor. We don't consciously make the connection between the culture, the environment that produces a particular type of human being, and the human being that is produced. And this creates a certain kind of schizophrenia, because every culture has a statistical probability field of producing a certain type of person to a certain type of degree. And you can tell that in the statistics. So, for example, in US culture, 1 in 7 Americans are substance addicts. Now, that's a different number. Maybe in Europe it's 5, 1 in 5, which, would show, X% invariance in the culture. For example, we might correlate addiction to the length and drivenness of work. And in Europe, they work fewer hours as a statistic. And the harder you push the body, particularly when 70% of Americans don't like their job, the harder you push your body to do something the majority of time that you don't like, it may create a certain amount of pain, leading to a need for an anesthetic. And so it's not a mystery. It's not like this is some bizarre, strange phenomena that no one could possibly, from a scientific perspective, make the connection between pushing one's psyche and one's body into extraordinary amounts of pain most of the time and the need for an anesthetic. You just have to correlate the fact, when an elbow is broken, who wants painkiller? Why do they want painkiller? Because they're in a lot of pain. So the correlation between anesthetics and pain is only obscure in the dimmest of cultures, in a willful ignorance to look at the corollary data. And yet, partly because cultures are so self-referential, it's the only way many of them can survive because they're not intelligent. They're self-referential. And so they proudly march down the street and they're, with their parade every 4th of July or whatever it is. And they say, we are this way, and we're this way because we're this way, and we'll always be this way because we're this way. We were this way before, we're this way now, we will be this way in the future because that's who we are, because this is the way we do things, dun 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 dun. And it's like, oh my goodness, isn't that wonderful? We're this way because we're this way. But we don't do a critical analysis. It's not like every year we say, wait a minute, we are the fattest country on earth, all things being equal, and that is the way we are, and we're proud of it. It doesn't seem to be something to be instilling as a cultural norm. Should we be celebrating obesity, or should we be talking about why we're in so much pain? We're shifting to food as an anesthetic as opposed to food as a source of nourishment. And so, well, we're number one in obesity. We're number one in this area of ignorance. We're number one here. We're number one here. But is that what we want to be? And as a cult, as a self-referential cult, nobody likes to question that. Because why? Because what's the purpose of a cult? It's to protect us from the unknown. Why are we so excited that we always do these bizarre things? I mean, what man in their right mind, what woman in their right mind, living in a hot summer climate, high humidity, high heat Asia, wherever, is going to put on a wool business suit and be proud of their intelligence for walking into the office in uncomfortable, expensive, and dramatically overheated clothing, simply because everyone else is doing it. What intelligent human being is going to be proud of that level of willful ignorance of what it means to be intelligent? Intelligence is the efficiency with which energy is transformed into human well-being. And so if you spend more money to buy something less uncomfortable and obviously more expensive, more hot. This is not intelligent. And so the question is, how does something so unintelligent scientifically become intelligent culturally? And it's quite simple, because you have a super intelligent person who arrives with a nice flowing white silk robe because it feels great. It's absolutely wonderful. It's easier to throw on. It's got more flexibility. You can open it up, close it down, etc., 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 etc. So you have one person who behaves intelligently. Intelligent relative to science, meaning it's a hot day. There is technically, we've done the studies. Now, of course, we actually have to study intelligent things in an intelligent cult. So we have to do a couple of studies, and we measure the temperature. You put this clothes on, this clothes on, this clothes on, and all 100 people said, yep, this is the coolest clothes for this type of weather. This requires less natural resources. So this is cooler. It requires less natural resources. It takes less time to put on and take off. It is intelligent in every way to create human well-being with minimal energy expenditure, which is good for the environment, the economy, the family. Everyone benefits. It's good for your health, which is good for your family, which is good for the economy, blah, 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 blah. So you have intelligence. But intelligence, when it shows up, is not met by scientists. It's not met by white coat lab folks that said, wow, this is the most intelligent person in the office building. They have reduced heat by 40%. Bravo, gold star for that. They have reduced cotton consumption, and thus the toxicity of the way that we raise cotton with all kinds of chemicals. They have reduced cotton consumption by 38%. They have reduced the need for air conditioning in the office to accommodate the absurd choice of tradition. They have reduced air conditioning in the office by 28% while still feeling cooler, which prevents the city from having to redo its electrical grid for the hot days of the summer, blah, 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 with everyone with air conditioning. So they've done that. They have saved X amount of CO2 in the environment. They have saved 3 minutes dressing and 3 minutes undressing. They are more comfortable and relaxed. They are also more sane because they're not having a conversation in their mind that is saying, oh my gosh, why the hell do I have to wear this dumb outfit to work when I could be wearing a more comfortable outlet like I would be doing at home? And what is this about business being interested in making money by making things worse? What is this about innovation? All this stuff. So you don't get met with a scientist that gives you gold stars on every point for intelligence. Instead, you get met with politicians, which anyone who knows the track history of politicians versus scientists knows we're going into dicey water here. You're getting met with politicians because the politician is the cult navigator. The politician is the cult navigator. And the politician is saying, oh, that's standing out. Who do you think you are? Do you think that standing out is going to offset the fact that you appear to be snubbing the CEO? The CEO, of course, doesn't think that dressing intelligently is a good idea. And so you think dressing intelligently is a good idea? Who exactly do you think you are? And so you're met with politicians who are interested in one thing. How will you be received in the group? Now, if you are a rich Arab sheik coming in to buy stuff and wearing intelligent clothing, you will be received very well because money transcends cult in a cult that is about money. So in a cult that is about money, you do all these weird and crazy things because of money. And if someone with more money, a billionaire Arab sheik, walks in wearing intelligent clothes in Arizona in the summer, You don't say, look at that fool, who does he think he is with clothes? You say, that's the most important customer in a company and a culture that's obsessed about money. And so let's all kowtow around and be friendly, etc., and pretend that there's nothing at all unusual about walking in a white sheet that's comfortable and pleasant with nice sandals, etc. It's like, of course, you're an intelligent people. Maybe we'll do something like that ourselves. And so there's no problem, because there is a transcendent value, money, that overrides the cult value of tradition, which is really in service to money. In other words, the company, the CEO, etc., is wearing unintelligent clothing because other CEOs are wearing unintelligent clothing. And other CEOs are wearing unintelligent clothing because the president of this and that country is wearing unintelligent clothing. The president of the United States is hot and uncomfortable in their clothes. And so is the vice president hot and uncomfortable. And so are the senior executives of the main lobbyists hot and uncomfortable. And so if you want to get in with the real money in a capitalist cult, you've got to do the obvious thing, wear uncomfortable clothes. I mean, you can't just... you think you'll make it to the top and somehow just be comfortable and intelligent? No. This is not about science. This is about cultism. And this gets back to the way that fashion was set in England by the royal family. Some idiot hires someone to look self-important, and a short nobleman is given a giant hat. A short nobleman, it's always a man usually, but a short nobleman is given a giant hat so that he can be seen in the crowd. He's delighted. He's so wonderful. Well, then the other noblemen don't want him suddenly his hat higher than them, so they all get hats, and now they're higher again. And then you can't have intelligent commoners, intelligent peasants, walking into their pubs and into their things and not having their hats knocked off. No. The nobility can now not walk anywhere into a doorway without having their hats knocked off. So we've got to copy them. We've got to spend vast sums of money making the most uncomfortable hat imaginable that will get knocked off just about wherever you walk, and that provides very little rain protection, because that's what the idiots up there are doing. The short guy to feel unimportant, the other guys to feel important, and now we've all got to do it to show that we too can follow our nobility over a cliff into the realms of stupidity, but associative stupidity. We're like you. We're idiots like you. You have the copying dynamic, which is so much a part of human beings, through empathy, through mirror neurons, monkeys copying whatever things we do. And so this cult dynamic has a very important structure of, are you one of us or are you not one of us? This is one of the most important things in the survival dynamic of for example, chimpanzees. When little tribes of chimpanzees reach a certain number in size, they often divide. So Jane Goodall noted that, as monkeys and chimpanzees grow, they reach a certain size, and then they divide into two groups. Now they divide into two groups, and then what often happens is at some point they go to war and they try and kill off the other one, and one genocides the other group. Well, you want to be part of the group as opposed to being split off, because the survival odds go up. You see, even if you are surrounded by complete fools, even if you're surrounded by complete and utter fools, the odds of you getting survival, security, love and belonging, self-esteem go up if you belong to a group of fools as opposed to do not belong at all. And this calms the body. The biology that has watched evolution for 5 billion years, the biology that has memories that are much bigger than the conscious or the cultish mind, remembers, puts together the fact that there was a time when, for example, the gazelle that lagged behind the rest of the herd got preyed on by lions. There was a time where the monkey that wandered off didn't get whistles from the other monkeys about a predator and was eaten. There was a time when the when the monkey that wandered off couldn't groom themselves and couldn't keep as clean, etc., and fell prey to disease. Therefore, the ultimate rule is to belong. If you want to survive and feel secure as a mammalian member of a mammalian species, you have to belong, and that means following the idiocy of those who have gone before you. It does not mean just saying, wait a minute, education, is that what you call this? Wait a minute? It's like, what? So you're going to teach me how to have a great marriage, right? Because that's critical in having mental, emotional health in an isolated culture. No, you're not going to do that. You're going to teach me how to drive a car, surely. You're preparing me for life, right? You're preparing me for work. So nothing's more important in the United States than driving a car, right? So you're going to teach me that. Oh, no, you're not going to teach me that in my education. I see. Well, we're an obese nation. We've got to learn how to cook and eat, right? No, you're not going to teach me how to cook and eat either? I see. Okay. And then you're going to teach me how to build a house. We've all got to have a house, right? You're going to teach me how to build a house for myself so that I'm not homeless like the millions of Americans. No, we're not going to teach that. And you're going to teach me how to start a small business? Really? A service business? Turn a product into a better product, resell something. We're going to start that in like 6th grade, surely, right? We all need money by that time, pocket money and stuff. So we're going to start little businesses in school to learn how to live in life. No, we're not going to do that. And what about communication skills? Like all the studies show that if you have great communication skills, you can advance. Oh, we're going to leave that out too, right? Emotional literacy, anyone? We all have feelings that have been correlated to drive the entire species forward. Every single human action in human history has been fueled by feelings. That's been the what gets the muscle turning, gets you out of bed. So we're going to learn all about how to harness and understand feelings, right? And tell the difference between feelings and emotions. Oh, we're not going to learn that either. We're a highly addictive, traumatized nation with lots of abuse. Are we going to learn about childhood abuse? Are we going to learn about addiction? Are we going to learn about trauma? Oh, that's off limits as well. I see. So what is this education that is so important for my future? Algebra, trigonometry. I'm not quite following you. Do you mean to say that my career is going to be determined by my algebraic skills? You mean to say that whether I get a raise working as a gym trainer or something is going to be determined by my calculus accuracy? It's like, no, but that is your education. Do you have a problem with that? Do you think you're better than us? You think you're better than us because you actually want to learn things that would be useful in life? How, who is this fool? Get him out of here. Send him to the principal. How dare you talk back to this cult? We were idiots long before you were born. We will be idiots long after you're dead. Don't presume to question the herd. Now shut up. You'll be punished, of course, for your stupidity in thinking. Another horrible thing we've got to drum out of you by the time you leave your education. Off you go. You can have a miserable life like the rest of us. But you will belong, and we'll all understand life is hard when you define education as abuse and then abuse all of your children and then send them out in the world with complete ignorance on how to engage with the world, life is hard. Because we make it hard. Because we do what we do, because we do what we do, because we do what we do, and we don't think. That's what a cult does. It protects us. It protects us from the unknown. The unknown. Who knows what would happen if children actually learned useful skills in school? Could be terrible. We might elect, get rid of the politicians. We might get rid of any number of insane federal programs. People might lose their job. We couldn't have that because there would be change, And so in this dynamic, there's this constant bullying dynamic between the healthy part that wants to grow in the individual and the bullying dynamic of the cult that's trying to shut them up and fit them into the box that is self-referential. It's not a good box, it's not a bad box, it's just the box that most people did before. And so we're going to do it again because we value avoiding the unknown more than we value intelligence. We value avoiding the unknown, and we also value things like, I don't want to have to think. I don't want to have to examine the cult, etc. It's fine. It's fine. It kills 1 in 1,000 or so in suicide. It kills 1 in 100 is homeless. It kills this. It kills it. But it's don't rock the boat. It's maybe all these people need to die to prevent overpopulation. It's like let's not push it. So the cult basically gives an infant, beginning with the family system, the message is that if you diverge from the norm, you could get slaughtered. You won't be welcome here. There's a great Monty Python sketch, where the father is a high society writer and poet, and the son wants to go into coal mining, and the father's there, and it's like, lunch and teas aren't good enough for you, son. You'll never know the hard work of a high society poet going off to luncheons, flying to Paris, going over to here. Says, no, that's not good enough for you. You have to go down the mine and pick coal with your highfalutin friends. Your dad's lifestyle of literature and esoteric studies. Is not good enough for you. You got to be a coal miner. Of course, playing on the reversing the roles, and there's this tension, this idea that to show respect for an elder, etc., is to copy unquestioningly the stupidity of whatever it is they're doing, and then one can belong. We do this because of this and this and this. And of course, there's a certain amount that is intelligent in a cult. It is good that everyone drives on the right side of the road. That bit actually makes sense. It's somewhat reasonable that if we're going to raise delinquents who don't know how to manage their feelings with a protocol of profound emotional illiteracy beginning in family and continuing in school, that we're going to have lots of violence, so we might as well have a police force. Questionable intelligence as to whether we should spend $80,000 a year locking up millions of our citizens, at the cost of well over $1 trillion, when we could actually spend $1 trillion teaching conflict management, relationship skills, etc., that would actually give people a nice life, rather than paying large amounts of money to have them sit in concrete boxes and become more dysfunctional before releasing a more dysfunctional individual back into the culture. A little bit of questionable thought, in that direction. But But, there's some things that are worth learning, and particularly in technological things. In a scientific arena, the cult has a lot to pass on. You don't need to reinvent steel milling, for example, for the most part, because in the scientific domains of a cult, it tends to be scientific. It's these areas of makeup and fashion and eating and the way people talk and dating that have nothing to do with science, that go head to head. Scientists say that domestic abuse goes down if you talk about these things in your relationship. Oh, good. Thanks for the tip. We'll make sure not to talk about those things in our relationships. And in fact, we'll go so far as to define you as uncool and unsexy if you talk about the things that reduce domestic violence. How about that for a fuck you to all marriages and cult, and relationships in the cult? We'll willfully ignore and do the exact opposite of the science. And so this comes back to the crisis of the 2-year-old, the crisis of the 5-year-old, the crisis of the 14-year-old, the crisis of the 21-year-old. That is asking their scientific mind, what is the intelligent thing to do here? And that one part of them is saying, well, this seems like a good start. And the other part is saying, no one else is doing it. And this part will saying, well, there's a lot of things that are really smart that no one else is doing. And this part saying, yeah, but we need to survive by being accepted by these guys, by these gals. You see, and they do talk dirty about women in the locker room. And I think they're going to throw me out if I stick up for women, rather than change their attitudes and say, good on, here's our new leader. I think they're going to throw me out. And they're not going to do a fair hearing. No, cults never do fair hearing. Cults just, they look around, they nod to another, and it's like, he's never coming out to the football game with us again. And we'll all give extra business to each other just to punish those people who diverge, however intelligently, from the pack. And so, it's like, I'd like to say this, but, it's like, I'd like to stand up to you in public, but, and so this, and this is generational. This is my generation. So it changes, with time, but it's no more different than the exact opposite of, women dissing men, and men not being able to push back, which, happens in the radical feminist terrain where that's sexist if you say that. But if we say that all men are pigs, that's just common sense. But all women are pigs, that's chauvinism, and so, it depends on the cult dynamic. And there are many of these pendulum swings. But cults are wrong almost all the time. The majority is always wrong because it's always following. It's always following. If you look at the bell curve of something, the majority is always following a bleeding edge minority. And usually by the time that something goes like, it's kind of like, the Microsoft stock. By the time that everyone's saying you can't go wrong with Microsoft is the time when you absolutely will go wrong with Microsoft stock. And the time that everyone says, that's an absolute shit of a stock is the time that Buffett and other leading investors buy the stock. Because the majority is always wrong. It's always wrong. But they provide belonging, and we have it as a human need. So we have this terrain. We have this terrain of the individual having to decide between the sanity of science and the insanity but security of the cult. The sanity of science and the insanity but security of the cult. The fact that it's true. When all of the bankers behave like idiots and the banks can't fail and they all copied each other, what did the bankers get in the 2008 financial crisis? They get a bailout because everyone was doing it. So we can't punish. Now, as soon as you're in a minority position, they'll punish you. It's like, because dysfunctional cultures punish minorities. You can actually measure the future trajectory and the evolutionary speed and the intelligence of a cult by how well it treats and integrates its minorities. Because within the minorities is the bleeding edge of the next great thing. Within the minorities is the bleeding edge of science. The cult is never the bleeding edge of science. If you asked the cult what they thought about Steve Jobs and Microsoft and innovative startups 20, 30 years ago, oh, that's an unsafe thing. Don't do it. Go be a lawyer. Go into banking. That's the thing. Yes, go into banking. That's in other words, it's a majority. It's a majority safe house. Except, of course, the cult doesn't tell you that lawyers are more miserable than the average person by a significant margin. It doesn't tell you that when you keep telling generation after generation to go be a lawyer, that the market gets oversaturated. So there's lots of high debt, low income lawyers. It doesn't say that the suicide rate is higher in lawyers, etc. It just says that's the thing to do. It's not referencing data. It's not staying up to date. It's just copying. I heard it from my parents, so it's probably even more wrong today than it was then because things change. But I'm going to just tell you, because what else am I going to do? We copy things. That's what cults do. That's what the undiscerning unscientific brain does, copies things. And so right about the time that the most pivotal change in our global finances history is taking place with Facebook and things, everyone's saying it's a terrible idea. It's a terrible idea. Google has to go around and has a harder time getting funded than any number of other things. Search was an unimaginably hypothetical, bizarre, bad idea. That's what search was when Google started. And so they were rejected and 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 rejected until the small bleeding edge minority, two guys, prove the majority wrong. And it's the most beautiful aspect of capitalism, which is a mixture of science and cult, is that as soon as you prove that something makes lots of money in a cult that deifies money as the primary value, it suddenly can't wait to change. And so in a cult that deifies money, that is the path of innovation. You have to go against the majority, be pummeled and rejected, and most fail. 95% of all startups in that domain will fail. And then, just like J.K. Rowling, rejected and rejected and rejected and rejected and rejected and rejected. And then this little thing. And then suddenly there's all the Harry Potter knockoffs. That's how cults work. They reject the most important ideas of their time, persecute their innovators, denigrate their minorities, and kill most of them off. And then a very, very tiny percentage, for whatever reason, believe in themselves enough to go through the crucifixion of the cult and emerge on the other side making lots of money. Otherwise, no one's interested in them, frankly. In a capitalist cult, they emerge on the other side making lots of money, and then they are deified, and then suddenly the cult shifts towards, oh no, now we need to make, now you too can start a search engine. But of course, it's too late. That's why the majority is never right. You need to look at the areas where intelligent ideas, from a scientific point of view, are being hammered at today to understand the next trillion-dollar industry, the next billion-dollar idea. And that's what you have to do. And we reference money in a cult that deifies money, because if I said kindness, if I said you need to look at the next kindness idea within the minority that's going to create billions of moments of human kindness, we don't have any lists or ways to measure that because we're a chauvinistic cult. We're a capitalist cult. And so it's of no interest. It's like, well, what good is that? How am I going to brag at a cocktail party that I created 3 times more kindness than I did last quarter? It's like, we're not a human cult. We're not a kindness cult. We're a capitalist cult. And so let's stay focused on bits of paper rather than human beings, because cults have been insane since the moment they've been invented. Cults are insane. We're not talking about intelligence. We're talking about insanity. And all of this weight, this entire history of stupidity, of insanity, this entire history of pain, of ignorance, of sending kids in the exact wrong direction of their future, this entire history comes into being at this moment where some impulse, some feeling, some truth, some secret in themselves comes out that is not acceptable in the cult. It should be hidden behind the wall. And it's one of the great albums of all time by Pink Wall about this entire framework of a cult's construct to make sure that the most significant parts of the psyche, of who you are buried and imprisoned behind a wall, and that the entire cult is organized to make sure that every little chink you might find to get out from behind those prison walls, you are met with more armed guards than you can deal with. And so you'll shrink back into your cell and stop trying to escape, like the elephant, which, as a little baby, has this little rope tied around them that they can't escape. And this human being who first takes away all their food, because the elephant would go out and get their own food, first takes away all their food with the rope and then feeds them the food. That's what a cult does. It takes away all of your resources and then says, we'll give you little bits of money if you do this, go to school and do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, and this, and this. We'll give you little doles out. You're obviously not an important person because you haven't made lots of money, and that's how we define importance in our cult. But, we'll give you little things here. You'll be able to survive. And so, but by the time the elephant is mature, it could snap that rope and walk anywhere and live a life of freedom. Of course, they'd get on motorcycles. They couldn't have one individual setting an example for the herd, and they'd be off like a shot after the elephant. Hundreds of people, what do we have to do? Do we have to kill this elephant so they don't teach the other elephants to be free? What do we have to do? Because we all know it's about money, and the tourists won't come to feed the elephant and pay us $100, for their little photo shoot and sit on an elephant's back, etc. But there's this principle of this very thin line. But because we're getting these glarings since we're 2 years old, since our parents' eyes sharpen like this, right when we do something at 1 and 2 years old, when we start speaking our emotional truths, etc., and we realize at 2 years old we're helpless. We've got to get these people to let us grow up. But by the time we've trained ourselves to be in prison, by the time we've trained ourselves to be in prison, to a point where we can survive the army of cult warriors standing around, threatening to kill us emotionally, mentally, financially, socially, and physically. My mother talked about an unexploding or an explosive rage that came over one time when I crossed some emotional boundary with her, at 3 years old. And the rage that can come over a parent as the child begins to take them into unexplored emotional terrain. Explosive rage. And it's like, what is that? The child doesn't know, the parent doesn't know. But one thing is clear. You cross the line, and these guys can and will kill you. Explosively and reflexively, if nothing else. You have got to learn the pattern. You've got to attune to the cult, because the cult is not going to attune to you, and the cult is not going to attune to science. You may have all the science in the world to say, just start with an hour a week. Let's spend an hour a week in all of our education systems around the world focusing on the topic that is most scientifically likely to bring well-being to that demographic. How about that? Would that be too radical? An hour a week? 2 hours? 3 hours? Could we even spend a single day of the week doing intelligent things rather than dogmatic, cultic things that have been done before because they were done before because they were done before, that are so tedious that much like our elections, it's so irrelevant. Why even bother showing up? Why grace the ritual of stupidity with our presence when it has so little to do with our well-being? So in this thing, we're very, very well trained to take certain parts of the wheel and they're taboo. So you may be an 18-year-old boy and you get the hots for a 14-year-old girl. Well, a scientist would have any number of historical reasons to explain, the biological pros and cons, the historical context, the fact that, in this culture they did it very well, and this culture not so much, and this would be the consequences, and this and that and the other. In this cult, it's like, don't you know for sure, you don't ever tell anyone that, so you got a secret. Now, the question is, do you keep the secret from yourself, or do you keep the secret from everyone else and create a wall between you and them? A wall that the bigger the wall gets, the more you've got to keep people out from seeing who you are, because who you are is unacceptable, is unlovable, is absolutely taboo. And so we have this dynamic here where, okay, so this thought is unacceptable. I won't even think it. I can't even look there. Okay, so then this thought is like, I could tell so-and-so, but not so-and-so. I need a little wall there. This thought over here, I can tell my friends, but not at work. I need another little wall there. This thought over here, I'm sure I'm a bad person for that, because I saw the despair on my mother's face when I began to articulate that truth when I was 5 years old. And then there's this wall here, and 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 there's this wall here. And the question becomes, as we start blocking off more and more and more and more of the psyche, of who we are. And remember, who we are is a reflection of the petri dish, the cult in which we are born. Meaning, it's not these thoughts, these feelings, they don't come out of nowhere. The biology comes out of a 5 billion year biological cycle. The emphasis on values comes out of the observation of cult represented through media and all of these things. And so every one of these things is produced by a cult, dynamic, by a culture. They're not coming out of nowhere. And if you're in an adrenaline-addicted cult, for example, where you notice that anything taboo gets suddenly everyone's attention, and you're in an adrenaline-addicted cult, then you'll actually be drawn to taboo areas, but in a certain way to kind of skirt the edge, to get the adrenaline but not do too much, etc. And this is, one of the sciences that pop stars learn is, how to get everyone's attention and keep it this with running the edge, etc., and hold their attention, but not so much that they disown you, because you've got to behave in a way that is controversial to keep attention, because we're an adrenaline-addicted cult, and then you've got to behave in a way that is understandable, so that if you say, I'm a fan of so-and-so, they don't say, oh, that's a terrible, unspeakable person, how could you? And now you find yourself alone because you're a fan of so-and-so, or you're a secret fan, or all of this stuff. Now, the problem comes When you're trying to grow as a consciousness, when you're trying to grow as an individual, when you're trying to become self-aware, which is the first step of evolution and growth, is to become self-aware. You're trying to do that. And you're running into these pocket walled-off things. You're running into these pocket walled-off things in which you can't face it because you've connected it with an inability to survive, to feel secure, to feel love and belonging, and to feel self-esteem. You've observed the faces, you've observed the media. You watched 100 movies in which someone who said something like that got shot, put in jail, raped, lynched, whatever. And so you've got that data set. And then you watch the faces of the people around you, and you saw your family saying, yeah, get him, that's a good one, kick him, and you realize, oh, they're talking about me. I had that thought. Now I'm going to hide it, right? I'm going to hide it behind this wall because I don't want my family to be cheering as I get kicked to death. And so we are incredibly sophisticated with facial language. Now, we've kept it unconscious because in a cult like ours, very few lies would be... See, if they really taught facial language, what we would understand as a species is just how hypocritical and divided we are. Because the face is saying this and this and this, and the words are saying this, and the face is saying this, and the body is saying this, the actions are saying this. And we would understand that we are a dissociative, insane, sociopathic, and incoherent cult. Well, we can't have that because that weakens the authority of the cult. And so we just avoid teaching that. But we sense it instinctively. There is a logic. In other words, there is a logic that says if Clint Eastwood playing this character equals beaten to death, plus Dad gets very energized. He's the most energized all day, right? It's like he's sitting there having his beers, watching his TV, smoking, and then he's really interested in this. And what he seems to be interested in is kicking the Clint Eastwood character. Get him, get him. That's his most energized moment all week. Well, there's no other thing to conclude other than that Dad has his most passionate feelings all week are not about the starving children in Ethiopia, are not about the fact that I'm emotionally numb, is not about the fact that his marriage is falling apart and he has absolutely no interest in doing anything about it. No, all that's fine, that's just normal cult. But the fact that so-and-so, didn't do what the sheriff said or was, whatever, that's got him all worked up. And then you say, it seems like if I went against my boss and told Dad about it, he'd be all over kicking me, what an idiot I am, and da-da-da-da-da. So I know the boss is an idiot. I know this is a good idea. But do I want my father, one, beating me up about it? Now, that in and of itself may not be such a big deal. But we all know what Mother does when Father beats me up and gets all worked up. She says, oh dear, come on, just let it go. Don't work your father up. She doesn't defend intelligence. She gets worried that the family dysfunction will come to light and wants to calm it all down and protect the system. So she's going to gang up on me. And then we all know her trump card, which is to burst into tears. Oh, whoa! And then of course the next sibling is going to say, "Look what you did to Mother! Look what you did to Mother!" And pretty soon the entire family system is glaring at you for having an intelligent idea that your father is too dumb to understand is intelligent. And now you've got, okay, am I going to just get rid of this family? And it's like, okay, well, where am I going to go to the intelligent cult waiting with open arms to bite me into, to 1,000 pieces. And it's like, it's a tough moment. It's a really tough moment for the human ego. Do we put up walls? And it's like, I just don't tell my parents this, and I don't tell my mother this, and I don't tell this, and I go silent here, and I go here, and I don't do this, and I don't do this, and I don't do this, and this, and I'm just spending, endless amounts of energy putting up wall after 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 wall. And then someone says, how are you feeling? And you've got to say the one thing that can fit through all of those walls. Oh, I'm feeling fine. So you got to now you're living a complete lie. But then of course they kind of know, because they don't really want to know the truth anyways. So they're kind of helping you avoid that topic. So you say, how are you? That means don't talk about the thing that you would normally talk about when we ask it. Oh, good, you remembered. We don't talk about that thing at dinner table and this and this. And so you've got the entire structure of lies and walls. And we're all collaborating to tell as many lies as possible while pretending things are fine. And of course, it's energy intensive. I mean, it's exhausting trying to remember this and that. And you can go a little bit here. And then, of course, it's completely boring. Why is it boring? Because it's a lie. Lies are always boring. You say, how much money you have? You have $5, but you say, oh, I'm a billionaire. It's boring because it means nothing. You're not thinking, oh, excitedly how I'm going to spend my billions, because you know it's a lie. It's boring. Whereas when you say, I've got $5 and I'm trying to decide whether to get some gum or invest it in this, and or some cigarettes, and I'm torn that I'm torn, and I'm wondering about this and this. Well, that's interesting, because you're engaging your feelings and your patterns about real stuff in your life. And everyone else may say, oh, that's boring. That's what you've been doing for 5 years, etc. But at least to you, you're not bored if you're telling the truth. If you're telling the vulnerable truth, you're not bored. I'm not bored making this video. It's interesting. It's interesting to look how a cult destroys its people. It's interesting to look at what I faced as a 2-year-old, as a 3-year-old, as a 5-year-old, as a 10-year-old, what I'm facing today with my clients, to tell this client the truth, or this, this, etc. It's very interesting. And the more truth-telling that's there, the more interesting and human it becomes. And the more fraught with dissociation. Because, you start telling the truth and suddenly they don't return your call. And so-and-so doesn't talk to you, and this and that doesn't tell, this. It's like, nobody around here wants to know the truth, so I am alone. I have been ostracized for stepping beyond the pale, beyond the wall. That's the Irish word for a stone wall, a pale. Beyond the pale. That which cannot be spoken about within civilized cult. So here's the problem, though. Now that we look at how the cult has ganged up for thousands of years to suppress the truth, our growth, our evolution as an individual, is the process of moving through life and our individual ego interacting with the larger part of who we are. There is a tremendous amount of acculturated ignorance around ego consciousness, but ego consciousness is a zoom-in language lens. So it's only conscious of what can be put into language, one. And that's why it's so important to write and to speak and to read. To write, to speak, and to read is because that's what helps something become conscious to the lens of the ego. And in this domain, something comes up that, let's say we always tell the truth, and we are a truth teller, and that's part of our identity. And the cult says good, 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 as long as you tell the right truths, of course, but good. We all believe in honesty. Very good, very good, very good. Well, why is Uncle Kenny at the table when he raped so-and-so and he hasn't apologized? What? We didn't mean that. No. No, we did not mean truthful about important, relevant patterns in the family. We meant truthful when it comes to no, we didn't mean it in paying your taxes accurately. What we really meant is that we like to think of ourselves as truthful if saying so helps avoid uncomfortable examinations of the truth in other areas. If that deflects attention from the truth, then we like your honesty. We didn't mean bringing up why Dad was seen with that woman down the street at the table. No, we didn't mean that. We didn't mean why you say be kind, but you shouted at that overseas Filipino who was answering the call center. We didn't mean that. We meant that we, without any reference to facts and data, are an honest, upstanding family, and you're part of it, and we're honest because we're honest, even though we don't tell the truth, and that's what we mean. And so at these points, there is a point in the growth in any individual where they have got to turn away from the cult of their family and the cult of their culture and turn towards the science of truth. The science that says, yeah, I have a really cruel and unkind streak. And if I follow it back, I notice it developing shortly after my father beat me when I was 5 and then humiliated me when I was 6. And then, by the time I was 8, I started beating my younger siblings. Let's look at some of the historical data. What is the general correlation between a father brutalizing an older son and the older son brutalizing the younger siblings? Is there an age variance? What is the culture? What is the culture of how this migrates? And now I've got this part in me that feels really unlovable because at 5 years old, when I was beaten for something I never did, I just felt completely unworthy and unlovable. And at that point, I decided I was bad, and then I decided, that I was never going to amount to anything, and da-da-da-da-da. And that's when I became this way and this way and this way. And so, at this point, and I feel a lot of grief around that because these things are true. I did hurt my younger siblings because it was painful to feel that I was the only one who had no value, that they had more value than me because they weren't beaten in the same way. Because parents learn on the first child, right? And so there's a part of me that feels unlovable, if not because I was treated in an unloving way, because I crossed the line, meaning our cult doesn't like to look at bullying. And yet, I was raised in a way to be a bully. In a certain way, particularly psychologically, because that's one of the cop-outs in our culture. In our culture, we're very chauvinistic. And so if you hurt someone physically, you're a terrible person. But if you hurt someone psychologically, it's no big deal. Sticks and stones can break your bones, but words can never hurt me. A lie. Complete and utter lie. You can destroy someone's life psychologically way more effectively than you can breaking an arm or something like that. Forget it. And so it's a lie. But it is a lie that is created to protect the chauvinism of a cult that refuses to be emotionally literate. And so, I can then look at the areas that I felt completely helpless and worthless, and the areas that I inflicted that virus on my younger siblings. I can say, I felt like absolute shit here, and I made sure that my younger brother felt like absolute shit in the same way. And when I made him feel the way my dad made me feel, I felt a satisfaction. And then there'd be a part of me waking up and say, oh my God, what am I doing? Where has this trance come from? And we get into psychology that says that, for example, with traumatic things that are overwhelming, when you have the overwhelming abuse of an abusive parent relative to a 5-year-old, they're a giant, that the intensity of that thing can create a dissociation, can put the child into a certain trance and pressure cook their psyche, their body, and they need to let off steam in some way. And that one way that in an unconscious and emotionally illiterate cult that we let off steam is by transferring the wound to someone else, to replicating it, so that we have some detachment from the dynamic, having replicated it, but still being dissociated from one's own wound. And that this replication can go on, that's probably why Dad is replicating his childhood abuse in his children, is because nobody knew, everyone obviously knew it was going on, but no one knew how to confront a cult that insisted on emotional literacy generation after generation after generation, by basically shaming and attacking and bullying anyone who talked about feelings in an important and sensitive way, particularly who was male. And so you have these dynamics coming up that are, we have the tension between what doesn't feel good in our conscience but is condoned and told it's fine in the cult. So our conscience is saying, this isn't right. This isn't right. I'm sorry. This is terrible. And then we have our family or our cult saying, oh, that was no big deal. You were 10 years old. That's what boys do. And it's like, but there's a part in me that wants to hurt people, that wants to cause pain, that feels hate. And that's, if you understand the rings of a tree, the inner ages are always contained within the outer ages. And so that part, whether it's 10 years old or 8 years old or 5 years old, etc., is still there. And when it comes into consciousness through language, when it hits the road in our journey towards evolution, the question is, what do we do? And what I'd like to suggest is that our cult teaches us that there are hundreds and thousands of thoughts and feelings, etc., that are not appropriate, that are not welcome here, that have to be shut down here, that have to be closed down here. That our cult teaches us that these things are taboo, to be unspoken and thus unconsciously suppressed. We don't talk about that at the dinner table. That's said in a pleasant voice. But if you say, but why? We do not talk. Now, if you keep pushing the taboo, and your parents will turn into insane, maniacal monsters, bursting into tears, behaving irrationally. Your lover will walk out and never talk to you again. Your boss will fire you. The teachers of your children will look at you in terror. Your friends will not invite you to the party. If you keep talking about this domain, your entire cult framework of survival, security, love and belonging, and self-esteem will dissolve. The self-esteem will dissolve because when everyone is treating you as if you're the most scary person around in the entire community, it's very hard to say, well, I'm proud of myself, even though everyone is terrified and hates me. Because I talked about an important, thing that's just scientifically relevant. It's very hard to feel love and belonging when nobody will look you in the eye, because you're owning a part of yourself that correlates with a part of them that they will not look in the eye. Meaning, whatever has terrified them into secrecy and silence about the probability field, the possibility field, and the actuality of their own psyche, emotionally, financially, whatever has terrified them into looking away and not speaking about that part in themselves, is the same program and code that is terrified of looking at that part in you. Now, there's a couple of different dynamics psychologically game playing that can occur here. One is they'll dissociate from you and turn you into the other. No, I never have an angry thought in my whole body. No. I would never. No, if someone raped my daughter, if someone, put cigarette butts on my 2-year-old child, I would pray to Buddha. I would forgive. I would forgive. That's the word I was looking for. I don't know what else I was thinking. If someone did this and this and this, I would never do that like you. You are a completely different species. Now, we may have 99.9% of the same genetic structure. We may have been born out of the same earth biology. We may be following the same laws of gravity and all that, but somehow, the fact that you have revealed this thing, is you're just from a completely different universe from me, and I can't relate. I'm sorry, I couldn't talk to someone like you. I couldn't work with someone like you. I could not acknowledge someone like you. Someone like you probably should be shot, but I'm too spiritual to say so. And so, I guess this, and I'm not going to acknowledge it because I'm not a judgmental person, but we're just not, I just wish you would disappear. And you know it facially, an acknowledgement that somehow they've projected that which is unforgivable, unspeakable, unknowable, understandable in themselves onto you, and now they're trying to get you to be on the other side of a wall of silence and secrecy and lies, that they've put that part of themselves on the other side of that same wall. So they put this part of themselves on maybe at 2 years old, and then of course at 5 years old they have no idea it's there, because they hid it at 2 years old, even before language. Because every time that part of themselves came up, their parents' eyes tightened, their facial thing, there was a little, when you were crying, they shook you a little bit more violently. Shut up, stop going into this direction. And you learned as an infant, you learned as a child, okay, fine, that part of me doesn't exist. I will banish that part of me on the other side of the wall as not existing. And so, of course, as the good, loyal, secret keeper, as a grown-up, unconscious, acculturated person, I meet that part in me in another person, and I want nothing to do with it. No. You're just a bad, horrible person. And that's all there is to it. I wish I could say something nicer, but you do not belong to me. You do not belong to this cult, etc., 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 etc. I spurn you. I will gladly contribute money to your $80,000 a year prison sentence. You should rot in hell. And it's like, oh my goodness. How much hatred do they have at this part of themselves? How much dissociation and insanity do they have? That, their greatest energy, remember Dad, the greatest energy is in punishing and dissociating this part of themselves. And you have this dynamic on the other side of the unconscious wall, the divide. I'm not like you. This thought in me that likes this and doesn't this, it's not me. It's not spiritual. That's not who I am. I could never try to bully someone, no matter how much I was hurt and humiliated. And it's interesting, in the Gulag, Solzhenitsyn talks about the fact that it was often the former prisoners who elevated to guards, because that's how you keep a system divided. You divide a cult. In this case, Stalin didn't want war heroes who had won the Second World War for Russia, but had exposure to the West. He didn't want them telling other people about the West because he wanted to control the version of reality. Stalin was a cult, and so you can't have truth coming into a cult because they don't mingle well. And so the actual heroes who won the Second World War for Stalin were seen as threats in their contamination of the West. So they were thrown into concentration camps along with Solzhenitsyn. And it would be prisoners of war who would be elevated based on their ability to turn on themselves, on the other prisoners, and inflict pain. And Solzhenitsyn noticed that they were more cruel to their fellow prisoners than the guards that just came out of the countryside who were not prisoners before. That there was something so horrific about the helplessness and the despair and the feeling of worthlessness of being treated that way by your own government with your own tax money just for existing, that when they had the power, that they wanted to somehow give a message that that was not them, that I'm different from you, that I am treated this way and you are treated like shit. You are not a part of me, much as they did to themselves, that part of them that was the wounded past. They want to say, that's the past. That's not me anymore. Now I'm on top. And I want nothing to do with those feelings of helplessness and despair and grief and need, etc., the feminine, that I felt before. And so I'm going to be even more cruel to communicate you are not a part of me. Cruelty communicates you're not a part of me. And in that sense, the dissociation of the self becomes the dissociation in the culture, in the community, in the family. As the black sheep, for example, takes and expresses all the dissonance within the family and then is disowned. That's the unspoken part. That has to be there mathematically. Now, this is a very important scientific thing. There is no energy that's created or destroyed. It's simply changed. So when a cult produces, let's say a family cult produces a 40% pain bubble, that's the equation. X practice plus X practice plus X practice plus X practice minus X practice multiplied by X practice divided by X practice times X practice equals 40% pain. But we are not a painful family. Well, what do you do with the 40% pain that you created as a family protocol? Well, it's got to be located somewhere. And this creates the need for a black sheep, for someone who will embody and house the 40% equation. Because it's just like a factory. DuPont creates the byproduct called C8 in the Teflon manufacturing process. And the question is, what is it going to do with C8? Because C8 causes birth defects. The cows around the DuPont factory have birth defects. The women who work in the DuPont factory have children with birth defects. C8 creates birth defects. And so they pump it into the river. And the larger communities around there have higher rates of birth defects, etc. And now C8 is in the bloodstream of the entire global population. The odds are if you test your 5-year-old child for C8, you will find it in their bloodstream. And it is a birth defective chemical as a byproduct of Teflon. What do you do with C8 if your manufacturing process creates C8? What do you do with it? Do you hide it? It shows up somewhere. It shows up in the deformed faces of cows in the neighborhood. It shows up in the silence or the harassment or the antagonism of the cities. Because while DuPont is destroying fetuses in animals and humans, it's also creating $1 billion of revenue, which is jobs. So it shows up in hostility coming from the community. Are you threatening our jobs by telling the truth? Are you threatening our jobs by telling the truth? It shouldn't be such a big deal. Who cares if a few cows? Who cares if the global population in India? Who cares if an Indian child at 5 years old, because of DuPont's $1 billion Teflon business, now has C8 in their bloodstream? Who cares? We have our jobs. This is the way the system is supposed to work. Who's going to replace our jobs? Who's going to do this? DuPont stood by us in this and da-da-da-da-da. Who's going to replace the parent? Sure, he's incestuously abusing the 6-year-old and da-da-da-da, but who's going to create the income? Yes, the government lied and did this and this and da-da-da-da-da, but who's going to run the country if we tell the truth? And this is the tension between the cult and the truth. It's not the tension between science. The scientist gets interested. Like, aha, I see. Well, if we'd add this variable in as a countermeasure or this and that, the other, then the system improves. And you get a government and a parent, but you get less incest, and you get less this, and you get less C8 in bloodstream, and less this. But that requires intelligence. It requires thinking. And most importantly of all, it involves the exposure of secrets. The taboo secrets that have to be examined. So in this framework, as we're becoming conscious, we have to decide, are we going to keep more and more secrets with others and become more and more aware ourselves and have the wall be that way? Or are we going to become more and more transparent with other people and have them put up the wall? See, this is the most lonely thing of all. I accept myself that I'm a cruel son of a bitch in such and such an area, and I look at the data, and it seems like 80-90% of American boys raised in this kind of situation, would tend to be more abusive towards their own siblings at 10 years old. And the reason is this and this and this and this. And the solution is that, dad needs a course on this, and the 10-year-old boy needs an environment like this, and the siblings. This is the solution based on scientific data. If you want the virus of healthy healing to take place, this is what you need to inject into the cult, so that that virus will not grow and this virus will grow. And this is exciting. And this is news. This is progress. You see, but in a cult that is framed with taboo and cannot think, thinking is a very dangerous thing in any cult. In a cult that is framed with taboo and not thinking, it doesn't get to the science. It just gets to, you cross the line, you're out. But I crossed the line because we need to see this, and we need to see this because we need to grow, and we need to grow because there's a way better way of doing this. You just change these ingredients in the cult, and suddenly bullying disappears, not because it's hidden, not because it's shamed, not because it turns into alcohol addiction for bullies and the bullied alike, but because of this and this and this variable in psychology. Oh, you think you're better than us. You're psychologically... No. Anyone can do it. A 10-year-old can do this. We're not going to think about it. We're busy. That's part of the... and busyness is one of the most insane but also effective defenses of a cult. And when a cult creates, as much resources as we have, and is this insane, there's only one way to maintain this level of insanity, and it is to get very, very, very busy. Because you can't break down a cult pattern in a tweet. It's pretty hard, right? Now, you can talk about a tweet for 20 minutes and break down the cult pattern. But in a tweet itself, you can't break it down. So that's why that's a very popular medium. A little Facebook like and all that, you can't break a pattern down. Okay, great. Let's communicate by emojis. Let's not talk about words. You can't break it down in a 10-minute phone conversation. Hey, how are you? How are you? I've got to go. You can't break anything down. But you can break it down in a 3-day family retreat. You can break it down in a video like this. So let's not watch videos like this. Why didn't you keep to the 5-minute format? You never could have pulled this off in 5 minutes. No. Well, let's all watch 5-minute videos. Let's watch 100 5-minute videos about absolutely nothing. Let's watch 100 5-minute videos. Okay, so we've got 500 minutes. So we could have watched one thing that went into depth, but no. 100 5-minute videos, no 2-hour videos, no 5-hour videos, no 6-hour videos. Why? It protects the cult. And so the issue as the ego is navigating, and it's important, look at the ego as this little magnifying glass inside of a larger body. Now you can think of this in another way. The DVD laser is the ego, and then the DVD is the whole pattern. So the DVD is all there, and then the DVD laser is going around saying, this is happening, now this happened, oh my God, what's going to happen next? And the laser of the ego is examining the whole in this pattern. And in the larger pattern, what is the larger pattern? It is the self that is bigger than the ego. Meaning, you cannot come up with any rational scientific way to separate the self from its environment. You can't take a cell out of a body and it just magically exists without any body. You can't take an ego out of a culture and it magically exists without any culture. You can't take a physical body and send it to the moon and it just magically exists. No. We are dealing with an interconnected system that has been culturally trained to be myopic. We're dealing with being a part of the larger body while being told that we're separate from it. We're told you're you and they're them and this is this and they have nothing to do with one another. But again, you take out the scientific instruments and you say, okay, well, where does your air come from? Seems like it comes from out there. There's an exchange of energy. Well, doesn't that mean you're connected? If you're exchanging energy with every breath you take, aren't you part of that which you are exchanging things with? Seems like it. What about food? Where does that come from? It doesn't just pop up inside the body. Otherwise, you could go to the moon. You could just vanish out into Mars, and you would be a complete individual. You'd sit on Mars and you'd put an infant on Mars, right? You'd just stick an infant on Mars. And they didn't learn language. They didn't learn cult. They didn't learn anything. No science, no language, nothing. And they would just live there indefinitely and grow as an independent organism. But of course, they're not disconnected. Without the Earth's environment, they'd be dead in a moment from lack of breath. Without food, they'd be dead in a few days. Without liquid, they'd be dead in a day or so. Without language, they couldn't think. Without people to teach them this and that, they would be starting from scratch. So they would basically be dead in a matter of minutes if they weren't in this culture, which means they are a part. There is a relationship of life. It is a synergy, the individual and its environment. So we are connected with the air, with the plants, with the weather, with the law of gravity, with other laws of physics, with language, with media, with cultural trends. We are connected to all of it. We are a part of a larger body. But when the larger body has gone insane in the cultural dimension so that it produces YDS, but then screens for YDS. It would be as if DuPont, which spits out C8 into a stream that it then poisons the whole river with, having spit out C8, then screens the larger river for C8 and punishes anyone who lives near the bank of the river except themselves. Because that's what a cult does. It produces toxicity in its people, but then punishes the people who get caught carrying the toxicity. It doesn't question its own manufacturing process. That's the number one most sacred cow of every cult. We produce 1 in 3 domestic partners that commit domestic violence. We produce 1 in 7 Americans who have substance addictions. We produce 80-90% of Americans who are compulsive, emotionally, mentally, financially, or physically in some areas. We produce X amount of obesity. We are a factory, we are a culture that creates this statistical probability field. We are also a culture that then turns around and blames the individual. Why are you fat? Nothing to do with the culture. It's nothing to do with the fact that we've asked you to stuff your feelings in this culture, and we've given the airwaves over to advertisers who are telling you you'll feel great if you eat their product. No, that has nothing to do with it. It has nothing to do with the fact that the FDA has approved a whole host of toxic chemicals and sugary foods with lots of carb. That has nothing to do with it. Why are you fat? Now, we get it that you are in this culture. And we don't get it that we are a culture that produces fat people. Now, I don't follow. I don't follow that. Yes, we sell advertising to the highest bidder. Yes, we promote the idea that free is good. Everyone loves something that's free, right? And we also promote the idea that if an advertiser pays for your media, that it's free. Is it really free if they're taking your attention to sway you in unhealthy direction? Doesn't sound free to me, but we're going to lie about that, and we're going to say this is free media. It's not free, but we're going to say it's free. And we're going to say that this is harmless. We're going to sanction this legally. Who cares if you're barraged with Mars bars and Pizza Hut and Pepsi Cola and then Coca-Cola, and you see all these skinny people. We're going to promote insanity. We're going to see all these skinny, happy people eating the food that creates fat, unhappy people. We're going to create images of skinny, happy people eating the food that creates fat, unhappy people. That'll really confuse people, right? It has nothing to do with, this has nothing to do with our cult. No. We're a cult that promotes the insanity insemination of our generation, but that has nothing to do with the cult. This is a great cult. Don't you dare diss the cult. It's a great cult. So we're going to promote insanity. We're going to sell advertising to the highest bidder. We're going to sell advertising to the highest bidder. Except cultural messages, like if Islam wanted to say, Americans, hey, why are you looking at this and not looking at this and doing like this? This is dumb. Why are you being hypocrites on the world stage? Now, if an Islamic organization wanted to buy that ad of just candid honesty that would challenge the cult, now every news network would understand that they couldn't sell that ad because the people would be angry that you were threatening the cult. The cornerstone of stupidity and the cornerstone of certainty. So it's not entirely the highest bidder. You have racial profiling, in the South in America, a few decades ago, and you could have a black person coming in with more money than a white person. So it's not really capitalism. Bigotry, insanity, sociopathic behavior, racism, more important than money. So first comes racism, bigotry, and maintaining cultural status quo, however insulting and stupid. Then comes money. Then comes human beings and intelligence and basic decency. So you and I are going along on this bicycle wheel of human consciousness. Now, the law of this bicycle wheel says that in order for it to turn, every single spoke of the wheel has got to make contact with the ground. Now, what happens if this wheel is turning along, and we get a vague anxiety that pretty soon this is going to make contact with the ground? There's something here, and another 6 inches, and have contact with the ground. We put on the brakes. I don't want to go there. So now we're stuck. We're on a bicycle, but we're stuck. Now, why don't we want to go there? Well, if we consider ourselves an honest person, and what's about to come to consciousness is something that if we told our mother, let's say we're lesbian, and we're in a homophobic family, and our mother is reasonably sane, reasonably nice, at least on the surface, except that she is a cruel, sadistic son of a bitch when it comes to being lesbian, because she had a little bit of lesbian energy towards her, and it terrified her mother. That terrified her own mother more than any other thing in the world, and she vowed that she would hate her own lesbian side. She would suppress it under the ground, and none of her children would be lesbian, because she needs to protect her mother's ability to love her as she is, which means that she's not that. Okay, so she's now secured her love by imprisoning and tormenting a part of her psyche. Okay, normal behavior in America. So now she's got a daughter who, see, if she accepts that her daughter is okay to be lesbian, then it was okay for her to be lesbian. But then it means that her mother was, a homophobic idiot, as opposed to this great pillar of nurturing energy, right? This great pillar of nurturing energy over here, but a homophobic idiot over here. That's complex. For a culture that doesn't teach people how to think, that's complex. It's like homophobic idiot, nurturing pillar, source of inheritance. Ooh, that's a difficult thing. You see, if I'm an honest person and I'm dealing with homophobic idiocy, what if surely I have to confront homophobic idiocy in my family, because otherwise I'm participating in the stupidity of our ongoing culture intergenerationally, and I don't want to do that because I walk my talk. So I'm going to confront my mother, but I'm going to lose my inheritance. See, it's a difficult thing. So I can't let the wheel turn. I can't let the wheel turn because I'm going to lose my inheritance, and because I don't believe I can make it on my own, because my mother didn't make it on her own. I believe we're basically weak and and so it threatens survival, security, love, and belonging for the wheel to turn forward. So we got to stop it. But the brakes, okay, they apply. Okay, brake. This is now 4 inches away from being conscious as opposed to conscious. There is no support in the entire culture for what's going on. You don't know what's going on. You don't know why the wheel is stopped. You don't know why you can't feel anything, because you go numb here. In order to be unconscious, the unconscious starts to spread. Maybe you stop the wheel with a judgment. I'm a shit. I don't deserve to be loved. Or you stop the wheel with an addiction. You get here and you get frantic and you start running around. You're running around and it's frantic. Maybe you stop the wheel by externalizing and hating someone else. So you're getting close to seeing your own part of this nature in you, and then it's so unwieldy and unmanageable to understand that you could lose your inheritance and then lose your life and then lose your social status, and the whole world is coming to an end because of one awareness. And so you find someone else out there who has that awareness, and you hate them again to let this part of you know you are not going to show up and ruin the party. And Sleeping Beauty, in the uninvited relative. The uninvited guest is always the cursed one. Because when you refuse to invite part of who you are into the guest house of human consciousness, you are banishing it to unconsciousness. When you banish something to unconsciousness, you cannot respect it. You cannot see it, and you cannot see it again, which means you cannot honor it. When you dishonor a part of who you are, it becomes your enemy as a scientific fact. In the same way that when you will not honor a stone pillar that you are driving towards, you will hit the stone pillar and you will die. You will hit the stone pillar and your car will be totaled. You will hit the stone pillar and the stone pillar will crack and fall on the car. When you dishonor something because you have suppressed its consciousness, it will encounter you in a violent way, because you cannot attune to something that you are unconscious of, and you cannot be conscious of something that you are suppressing. And this is the grief. This is the crisis. This is the point in time that all of us in our cult, all of us as human beings, find ourselves in today, find ourselves in right now. That there is something just on the other side of the wall that, if it comes to light, seems to set in motion a chain reaction that ends in our demise, socially, financially, emotionally, culturally, and thus physically. Because without our culture, without our cultural protection, without the stability of the status quo, without the support of friends, etc., we cannot survive emotionally, financially, psychologically, etc., in the way that we can with that support. If you're a sweet pea and the gardener is watering you every day, and you develop a blight because the seed and that soil and that condition creates such a blight. It's not like you decide, I would like to be blighted. No, you develop a blight in that culture, in that environment. And you understand that the gardener will pull you out because you are blighted and you want to survive. You may hide the blight. You may eat and internalize the blight. You may take it inside so the gardener can't see it.